My first YouTube broadcast for a keynote, so I hope it works out okay for you. And I want to thank Paul for inviting me to give a presentation for the Interpret Sweden Network. He asked me to do a couple of things. He gave me a half hour. Giving an interpreter a half hour of time to talk is like trying to put a 12-inch foot into a 6-inch shoe. So, so I'll do my best. You probably noticed my bugs since I started out as a naturalist. Um, I've always had bugs and turtles and snakes and all that stuff. So I feel comfortable being surrounded by my bugs. Um, since I started in interpretation, I started back in 1976. So we're looking at about 44 years as being an interpreter. And when I started as an interpreter, I didn't know what an interpreter was. We didn't have interpreters, we had naturalists, and mostly park naturalists. So when I got out of the Army in 1976, I ended up going back to Ohio State University. And I was thinking, gee, I think I'd like to be an aquatic ecologist because I was big into seashells, or a zoo director because I was big into animals. And so I was looking for a job to help pay for college, and I was lucky that I got a job at the Ohio State University Museum of Zoology. And yes, I am a zoologist, a mammologist, an ornithologist, a paleontologist, an archaeologist. Most of the ologies I've had training in and have done and do today. And that was a great job. I did that for 5 years in the summer, or in the academic year, but I needed a job in the summer. And so I was looking for a job in the papers, and I saw that Ohio State Parks was advertising for park naturalists. And as a park naturalist, you would do nature walks and give campfire programs and demonstrations with animals and things like that. And I thought, well, geez, I can do that. So I applied for a job with Ohio State Parks, and I got it. And so I spent 5 summers actually working with Ohio State Parks as a field naturalist, later to be called an interpreter. And it was interesting because my first job, of course, giving a program on snakes, the deadly hunters, in our amphitheater at Mohegan State Park in Ohio. And I was standing in front of about 350 people to make them think how wonderful snakes were. And I'm going, what am I doing here in front of all these people? And by the end of the summer, I found out that not only was I good at it, but I really liked it. And so when I went back to Ohio State, I found out you can get your degree majoring in interpretation. Yeah, interpretation is a real thing, like doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, interpreter. So I switched my major from zoology to interpretation. And for 5 years, I did my job at the Museum of Zoology. And then in the summer, went to state parks in Ohio. But then I started taking courses in interpretation, because at Ohio State, we had 5 courses in interpretation. We had basic introductory course to interpretation. We had urban interpretation. We had interpretive master planning. We had interpretive exhibit planning design. We had special studies in interpretation that was on field trips and field organizations. So I ended up taking all 5 courses in interpretation. I think Ohio State was the only university that had that many courses in interpretation, because we're talking about 1976. So what was nice was that I had the courses, but then I went back to my summer job with the parks as an interpreter, and I was able to find out what actually worked and what didn't work in interpretation. In other words, a reality check. Learning interpretation from books is fine, but then all of a sudden you got to go out to the real world and you find out a lot of that just doesn't work that well. And so I did my bachelor's and my master's degree in interpretation at Ohio State. I did a stint as a interpretive planner for Alberta Provincial Parks in Canada, and worked on interpretive master planning for 2 World Heritage Sites. And then I also wrote my very first textbook called Malabar Farm, The Interpretive Planning Process, which I used when I went back to Ohio State for my master's degree. I used it as a textbook for my course. The first textbook in interpretation was that one, Interpreting Our Heritage, back in, 1975? When was the date? No, 1957 is when Freeman Tilden got all this stuff started. And so one of the questions that was posed is, why interpretation? Why did I decide to go into interpretation as a career? And there are a lot of things that happened since 1976 to today. The interpretive profession has grown in a lot of ways, and which is why I'm excited about the Interpretive Swedish Network. And we have had and have several professional organizations. We have the National Association for Interpretation, we have Interpretation Canada, we have Interpretation Europe, Interpretation Korea, Interpretation Wales. Most of the countries have an interpretive group. And the thing I like most about interpretation is that we're storytellers and we're agents of change. One of the things I find is that most of the visitors to our museums or our parks or our zoos come to look at the animals or look at the trees or look at the historic sites, but they don't understand the story that's connected to them. I call it the rest of the story. And that's one of the ways our profession has grown is we've moved from just being identifiers of plants and animals and buildings and a Wikipedia for history to finding the rest of the story hidden in objects and artifacts and telling that to people. Let me show you some examples. This is a cone shell. This is called a textile cone. Conus textilis is its scientific name. And by the way, did you know that scientific names are common names in a dead language? Might be one way to tell people about scientific names. For example, the word pupa for the insect grub and the little pupa, like for a butterfly. The word pupa is Greek for little ghost. Little ghost, and that's what a pupa looks like. But this snail shell is from the Philippines. It has a story. One of the stories is that this is sometimes called the cigarette snail, like smoking cigarettes. So when divers are in the Philippines looking for shells like this, because they like to sell them for souvenirs and for the collectors, this particular snail has a snout that has a harpoon in it, kind of like the fang of a rattlesnake. And if you pick it up, it'll shoot that harpoon into you, and it's very, very poisonous. So the story is that if you get stung by this cone shell, you have enough time left to smoke a cigarette before you die. And that's about how poisonous it is. So there's a rest of the story. I've been doing some work in Greece, interpreting 2,000-year-old mines. Here's a rock. Now this rock looks just like any rock you might find on the ground, except where we picked this one up was by one of the ancient mines. This rock contains silver and lead and some other materials. It's rocks like this that were mined in the tunnels to get out silver. And it's the silver from these mines that made Greece rich by creating silver coins. So, a simple rock did indeed launch 1,000 ships in Greece, because the money from the silver was used to build the Greek fleet. So there's a story there. We have other stories too, like when is a skull more than a skull? Well, this painted skull is from Mexico, and while it's a pretty decorative skull, it's also part of the Day of the Dead ceremonies. Now, the Day of the Dead happens around Halloween, and all the people paint up their faces and paint up their sites, and that's when their relatives come back as spirits. And the spirits walk amongst the living people. But to not scare the spirits away, they dress themselves up with Day of the Dead faces and figures so that the spirits will feel comfortable walking with them. So that's when a skull is more than a skull. Another last story that interpreters can help with is this. You probably recognize it because you're all bright people. This is a paperclip. There is a pretty long story about the history of paperclips because there was a time when paperclips did not exist. Somebody had to think it up because otherwise papers were just blow all over the place. So they came up with, actually there's a paperclip museum that shows all the different kind of paperclips. But there's more. This paperclip in the wrong time in the wrong place could have gotten you killed. And that happened in Norway during World War II, during the German occupation. The resistance would wear a paperclip on their coat lapel or on their shirt. And the paperclip was a sign of unity, holding us together to fight the Germans. When the Germans figured this out, and if you got caught wearing a paperclip on your coat, you'd be arrested and shot. So when's a paperclip more than a paperclip? When it's used as a symbol that brings people together. The other thing I like about interpretation is that it creates a sense of mystery if you do it right. For example, here's a Pepsi can, common one, but a good interpreter can take that Pepsi can and make it float, and then bring it back together again. Now, probably when you saw the Pepsi can float, let's do it again. You're probably curious. You're probably wondering, well, how do you do that? How do you make that Pepsi can float? Well, in interpretation terms, that's our provoke. Remember, based on Tilden's interpretive principles, provoke, relate, and reveal, good interpretation begins by making somebody curious. Gets them to wonder, God, how'd you do that? Here's another example that I use in my training courses. Here's an idea. It's up there floating around. And then you catch the idea. And if you catch the idea just right, you can make something out of it. But if what you have is a bad idea, you can take that bad idea like this. Make it go away. That's why I call interpretation magic, because we can also make bad ideas go away, or we can help people find and create good ideas. And that's one of the important jobs of interpretation. Now, some of the things that we're doing today to move the profession along is publishing magazines and ideas where you all can share your ideas. This is Interp News. Interp News is our International Heritage Interpretation e-magazine. Subscriptions are free, and there's articles about culture, history. This one has articles about the Inuit north of the Arctic Circle, and also articles about global warming. We have a brand new one that's called Interpretive Explorer. An Interpretive Explorer is a magazine about personal interpretation, about places you've gone, things that you've seen, what kind of interpretation was going on. And that's where you write about the interpretation you either have been doing, or you write about interpretation that you see and that you like to share. When I talked about interpretation being agents of change, and we did have a theme for this interpretation. The main theme for this little talk is interpretation is the most powerful communication process we have available to share our stories and our mission with our audiences. It's the most powerful communication process we have. Tell our stories. And that's where we can become agents of change. We just started working. There we go. With climate change. And right now we offer courses in how to interpret climate change to park visitors and museum visitors, because a lot of people just don't know. I mean, climate change is happening. It's all around us. We see it in the news every day. But if you're an interpreter at a park, a museum, a zoo, historic site, how do you create a program to provoke, relate, and reveal your story and how climate change affects the zoo animals, how climate change affects your community, how climate change might affect local agriculture, just what is happening with climate change. So right now, as we move forward into why interpretation, we have Interpnews, which shares 100 pages of articles, and it comes out 6 times a year. We have Interpretive Explorer, which looks at personal interpretation. We offer the Heritage Interpretation Training Center. We offer 44 college-level courses in interpretation. I remember when I first started 44 years ago, we had 5. And now we teach 44. We teach interpretive master planning, we teach interpretive exhibits, we teach how to do feasibility studies, we teach about how to train the trainers. We have 44 courses in interpretation. And right now we're doing a lot of work in training people and doing interpretive program workshops on how to interpret climate change. So that's why interpretation, because we're agents of change. We can help people understand the why and the how and the where and the what you can do about it to our stories. And so that's why and I have done interpretation for 44 years, because I could see that in the course of a summer, I had 60,000 people come to my interpreter programs at the park. 3 months, 60,000 people. And if I even got 10% of them to think about interpretation, to think about preserving habitats, to think about not having invasive plants planted in their yard, if I could have them think about recycling. Look at all the thousands of people that those programs can affect. Now you take my one set of programs and you take the fact that we had 50 seasonal interpreters all through Ohio, then those interpreter programs were affecting over 100,000 people every summer. It's 100,000 people that maybe started to recycle, 100,000 people maybe put in rain gardens, 100,000 people that planted with native plants and not invasive plants. So why interpretation? Because we are agents of change. Our job is to help people understand their responsibility in a global ecosystem, but also understand that their own backyard is a habitat as well. Remember Tilden's principles: provoke, relate, reveal. Now, when Tilden wrote his book in 1957 about provoke, relate, reveal, the principles of interpretation, those principles have been around for a long time. They're called marketing and advertising, and that's where interpretation came from. The basic principles you see in every TV commercial you see. They provoke your attention as to why you need that product. They tell you which audience needs that product. Is it a family with little babies? Is it people that need a car? Is it people that need health care? So they provoke your attention with their graphics as to why you need this product. They relate to you as to how this product will make your life better and healthier and safer. And then they reveal to you how to get it. provoke, relate, reveal. So that's the standard. That's kind of the lattice work of good interpretation. Now within that, we've added some things. We've added mass customization. We've added markets of one. And we've added the experience economy. Now those are 3 books that you need to look up, because the experience economy says when people come to a park for a museum or a zoo or some other program, they're coming because of what they get to do. They're coming for the experience. They're coming for the zoo experience, or they're coming for the park experience, or they're coming for the program experience. And those experiences are everything from gaining new knowledge to helping them feel good about themselves to helping them learn a new skill. But every time a person comes to an interpretive program, they have an agenda. They came to that program because they wanted to take away something from the program. And that gets into the new psychology of interpretation. We just don't spit facts, dates, information anymore. We're thinking about how can we get that visitor inspired to take the stories that we've given them and take it home and do something with it. Make a change, share information with a friend. But interpretation is outcome and product based. A good interpretive program is an advertisement for social change. It's an advertisement for climate change. It's an advertisement for protecting parks and nature reserves and historic sites. An interpretive program has an outcome that we want people to think, believe, or act in some way that they may not be acting, thinking, or participating. So that's one of the major goals of interpretation. So that's kind of the things that we thought about. Did you realize that if you have a pencil and you wanted to interpret a pencil to a visitor, like at a museum, that it takes 25 steps to make a pencil? Yeah, because it just doesn't start out like this. It starts out at a mine in South America to get the materials for the lead. The wood comes from a tree from who knows where. There are machines that had to be made to cut the wood and do the pencil. There has to be paint to paint it. There has to be a box for it. I mean, there's about 25 steps from the time a person thought of a pencil to all the things that had to be done to end up with a pencil. And that's some of the stories that interpreters talk about. Now, one of the things that I'm gifting you is this is my textbook, one of them, on interpretive master planning. This is my main textbook for all my courses. And it has all the basics as to what interpretation is and Tilden's principles, how to do it, how to plan it, sections on trails, sections on exhibits. This is one of the main textbooks for the Heritage Interpretation Training Center. It's an ebook, and so I've sent this ebook to Paul as a gift for you if you would like it, for free, to help the Interpretive Swedish Network people begin to build your library if you don't already have it. Now, sorry, it's only in English, but you're all smart people. I'm sure you can figure it out. There are pictures, so maybe that'll help. So you'll get that. I also sent him the PDF for Interp News. So you can all go, I don't know, maybe you'll post it somewhere, or maybe you'll just send it to you. And you can all get Interp News, and I encourage you to write an article for Interp News. We'll share it with interpreters. Interp News is 300,000 copies. That's 300,000 copies that go to 60 different countries. So if you have an idea to share, a lot of people will get it. So I'm getting close to my time. You're probably wanting a coffee break or a banana or something. And so I'll kind of wrap things up. Remember, the theme was interpretation is the most powerful communication process we have to communicate our stories to our visitors. And I hope I've shared with you some examples as to just how that happens or how you can make it happen. Now, with your interpretive Swedish network being fairly new, as I understand you're trying to get it going, the most important resource you have to each of you watching this video, the most important resource you have at your command to help you grow as an interpreter is each other. Is each other. And that's why these networks are so important. Create newsletters, create websites, create everything you can. Keep sharing information, keep having conferences. Because nothing is more important than to share ideas and to talk about new ideas with each other. That's how the profession grows. Well, I think my time is about up. I've been watching the clock here. I hope it wasn't too boring. If you want to know how to make a Pepsi can float, I can tell you that. We actually teach a course in interpretive magic, which is kind of fun. So that's what a little bit about why interpretation for me. If you can fall in love with a profession, I fell in love with interpretation, and it's been a part of my life ever since. And I've spent a lot of time to keep trying to get better at doing it. So hopefully this will inspire you to have that same philosophy of, I did a pretty good program, or I did a pretty good exhibit, but I can make it better. And that's how the profession grows. And I'll talk to some other people about what I did, and maybe they can help me make it better. Again, the most important resource you have as an interpreter is each other. So, don't pick up poisonous conch shells. Don't be afraid of skulls. Talk to each other. Enjoy the conference. Paul has my website. He has my email. And I invite anybody that wants to know more about interpretation, who would just like to get on Skype with me and talk about interpretation as a profession. I'm available. I spent a lot of years teaching university courses in interpretation, so I have open office hours. And I would love to talk to you. So that's my story. I hope you enjoyed the short presentation. I hope you enjoyed the magic. And I look forward to talking to you in the future. Have a great conference.